Rain hammered violently against the glass walls of Mercy Crown Hospital the moment Omar Diallo stepped into the emergency wing, his tailored suit still damp from the storm, his expression cold as stone. But before he could question the hospital director about the corruption scandal, he came to investigate a desperate scream cut through the corridor. "Please, my daughter can't breathe!" A trembling young woman dropped to her knees, clutching a little girl, gasping for air in her arms, while nurses refused to move without payment. Then suddenly the child broke free, stumbled toward Omar, and wrapped her tiny arms around his leg. "Help me, uncle," she whispered weakly. The moment Omar looked down into her tear-filled eyes, his entire body froze. Because somehow, those eyes looked exactly like his. "Before we continue, tell me honestly, if you discovered a child in desperate need and something inside you instantly made you feel connected to them, would you help without hesitation or walk away? And where are you watching from today? Drop your country and local time in the comments. I love seeing where everyone joins from around the world. If you enjoy emotional, dramatic stories filled with shocking twists, deep secrets, and powerful endings, be sure to subscribe and stay with me for the next part." The little girl's fingers slipped from Omar Diallo's trouser leg only when two nurses finally rushed forward with a stretcher. Everything that followed happened with the speed and confusion of a car crash. One nurse lifted the child's thin body. Another snapped orders toward the treatment room. A doctor barked for oxygen. A metal trolley rattled across the polished floor. The mother stumbled after them, half running, half falling, her face drained of all color. "Please," she cried, reaching toward the swinging doors. "Please save her, please." Then the billing officer stepped in front of her again. "Madame, you still have not cleared the deposit?" The woman stared at him as if he had become a monster wearing a human face. "My daughter is choking hospital policy." For 1 second, no one moved. Then Omar turned. He had entered Mercy Crown Hospital to investigate reports that millions meant for poor children had vanished through fake invoices and ghost accounts. He had expected lies, fear, maybe arrogance from administrators who thought his donations bought his silence. He had not expected to find a child fighting for breath while accountants guarded the emergency room like prison gates. His voice, when it came, was quiet enough to be terrifying. "Move." The billing officer blinked. "Sir, I said move." The man stepped aside so quickly he nearly collided with the wall. Omar looked at the nearest doctor. "That child receives every treatment she needs. Immediately. If anyone delays her care for money again, they will not work in this hospital by morning." The doctor nodded so hard it seemed painful. "Yes, Mr. Diallo. Of course." The mother swayed where she stood, one hand pressed to her mouth. For a second, she looked as though she might collapse. Then she forced out 2 words. "Thank you." Omar barely looked at her. His gaze was still locked on the closed emergency doors through which the child had disappeared. Those eyes. Something about those eyes had struck him with unreasonable force. Not only their shape, though, that alone had been enough to jolt him. It was the strange feeling that had come with them, something raw and immediate, something older than logic. He hated that feeling at once. Omar Diallo trusted facts, leverage timing, contracts, patterns. He did not trust instincts that came like a blow to the ribs. Yet his chest still felt tight. He loosened his tie by a fraction. "Director," he said without turning, "I want full access to every emergency billing record from the last 3 years." The hospital director, a heavy man named Kojo Bemba, hurried forward with sweat gathering at his temples. "Mr. Diallo, I assure you this is an isolated misunderstanding." Omar finally looked at him. Kojo stopped speaking, because Omar's face had changed. He was still composed, still elegant, still perfectly controlled. But there was something colder beneath it now. Something that made powerful men regret being born dishonest. "If this child dies," Omar said, "your career dies first." Silence spread through the corridor. At the far end of the hallway, beneath a flickering light, the young woman had gone very still. She was drenched from the rain. Her blouse clung to her shoulders. Her cheap sandals were muddy. A faded bag hung from one arm by a broken strap. Strands of wet hair had escaped the scarf around her head and stuck to her cheeks. She looked like hundreds of struggling women Omar had seen in the city and then forced himself not to think about. Women standing at bus stops before dawn. Women carrying sleeping children on crowded sidewalks. Women bargaining in markets while hiding their exhaustion. And yet there was something in the way this one held herself, some old trace of dignity, fighting not to collapse, that made his attention keep returning to her against his will. She sensed it, and for the first time since the emergency doors had shut, she lifted her eyes fully to his. The world tilted, not outwardly, not enough for anyone else to see. But inside, Omar, something shifted with such violence it felt like a fracture reopening under healed skin. He knew those eyes, not from the child, from her. Amina. The name did not arrive all at once. It rose like something long buried under years of work, anger, and deliberate forgetting. First came a memory of laughter under yellow streetlights. Then the image of a young woman in a blue dress turning toward him on a university campus. Then the feeling of a hand slipping into his, while both of them still believed love could outrun class, family, and ambition. Amina Njeri, his first love. The woman who had vanished from his life without explanation. The woman he had once searched for until searching became humiliation. The woman he had trained himself to hate, because hate was easier than grief. He stared at her. She stared back. And in her face he saw it too, the recognition, the fear, the old wound tearing open before either of them could stop it. Her lips parted. Omar. It was barely a whisper, but hearing his name in her voice again after all these years hit him harder than any accusation could have. His expression hardened immediately. He walked toward her, each step measured, each one colder than the last. She did not retreat, though every line of her body trembled with the effort of staying upright. You, he said. There were 1,000 things behind that one word. Shock, rage, unanswered years, a hunger for explanation he had once buried beneath boardrooms and acquisitions and headline-making success. Amina lowered her eyes for a second, as though the weight of his gaze physically hurt. Yes. Kojo Bemba looked from one to the other, confused. Several nurses pretended to work while listening shamelessly. Omar noticed and snapped, "Leave us." No one argued. Even the director found a reason to disappear. Soon only the rain, the distant machine sounds, and the low hum of hospital lights remained. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Amina was the first to break. "I didn't know this hospital belonged to your foundation," she said, her voice hoarse. "If I had known, you would have gone somewhere else." She swallowed. Yes, a bitter laugh escaped him before he could stop it. That sounds familiar. Pain flickered across her face. She knew what he meant. Of course she knew. Years ago she had disappeared in much the same way, leaving silence where promises used to be. Omar folded his arms. "You vanished." Amina closed her eyes briefly. "Omar, no. Don't say my name as if you still have the right." His tone stayed controlled, but the effort behind it was brutal. "You disappeared without a word, no explanation, no goodbye, nothing. One day you were planning a future with me, the next day you were gone." Amina's throat moved as she forced back tears. "I had my reasons. That is what cowards say when the truth makes them look ugly." She flinched, and he hated himself for noticing. Some cruel part of him had wanted this moment for years, had imagined her ashamed, cornered, forced to answer for what she had done. But standing in a hospital corridor while her child fought for air, he found no satisfaction in it. Only a deeper, sharper kind of anger. because she looked nothing like the careless traitor he had rehearsed in his memory. She looked tired, worn down, haunted, and somehow that made everything worse. Inside the treatment room, a machine emitted a sharp warning tone. Amina turned instinctively toward the sound, her entire body straining toward the child beyond the door. That movement told Omar something before any words could. Whatever else she had become, she was a mother first now. He followed her gaze. "What is her name?" Amina hesitated. The pause was small, but it was there. "Omar," she said quietly. "Please, not now. What is her name?" Her fingers tightened around the broken strap of her bag. "Zuri." The name struck him with unexpected force. Beautiful, soft, full of light. Nothing like the sterile coldness of the hallway around them. He glanced toward the door again, and despite himself, he saw the child's small face. Her lashes wet with tears, her hand reaching for him as though she already trusted him. Something twisted in his chest. He crushed it down at once. "How old is she?" Amina looked at him for a long second. 5. The number entered him like a blade. His mind, trained by years of negotiations and numbers and timelines, did what his heart had not yet dared. It counted backward instantly. 5 years. Rain. A vanished woman. A pregnancy never mentioned. A child with eyes that looked wrongfully familiar. No. His jaw tightened. It could be coincidence. Timing alone proved nothing. Resemblance proved nothing. The city was full of men whose children had their eyes, their temper, their gestures. He would not become one of them, pathetic sentimental reaching for fantasy because the past had suddenly taken human shape in front of him. And yet Amina would not look at him. That frightened him more than anything else. Before he could press further, the emergency room doors opened. A doctor stepped out, removing his gloves. Amina rushed forward. "My daughter." The doctor gave a careful nod. "She is stable for now. The breathing crisis is under control, but she needs to remain admitted. We need further tests. Her condition has been worsening for some time." Amina covered her mouth and began to cry with the exhausted relief of someone who had been braced for death. Omar watched her shoulders shake. Then the doctor added, "You should have brought her in earlier." The words landed like an accusation. Amina looked shattered. "I tried. I brought her to 2 clinics. They said we needed specialists. I didn't have the money. I was saving, but then—" Her voice broke. Omar looked at the doctor. "She stays here. Whatever specialist's medication or surgery she needs, arrange it." "Of course, sir." Amina turned sharply. "No." Both men looked at her. She wiped her face with trembling fingers and lifted her chin, forcing dignity back into place piece by piece. "I will not let you buy your way into my daughter's life." Omar's eyes darkened. "This is not about buying anything. For you, maybe not. For me, it is never that simple." Something old and wounded passed between them. Then Amina said the one thing that turned the air between them to ice. "You helped tonight, and I will never forget it. But after Zuri recovers, we will leave. You do not need to be involved." Omar stared at her. He could hear the rain outside, the beeping monitors, the lies breathing under her words. He did not know the full truth yet. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was not over. Not even close. By dawn, the storm had weakened to a thin grey drizzle, but Mercy Crown Hospital still felt trapped inside the night. The pediatric ward was too bright, too cold, too clean in the way expensive places often were. Surfaces polished until they reflected light hallways, scented with disinfectant and quiet money. Yet beneath that glossy calm, fear moved like a second pulse. Nurses whispered. Junior doctors avoided eye contact. Administrators walked faster than usual, as if speed alone could hide guilt. News of Omar Diallo's midnight arrival had spread through the building before sunrise. And now everyone knew two things. A child in Ward 7 had become important. And the CEO was not leaving. Omar stood outside Zuri's room with a tablet in one hand and a black coffee in the other, though he had barely touched either. Across the glass panel he could see the little girl sleeping beneath a pale blue blanket. Her face looked smaller now that the oxygen mask had been replaced with a thin nasal tube. Her lashes lay like delicate shadows against her cheeks. One tiny hand rested above the blanket still taped from the IV line. Amina sat beside the bed in the visitor's chair, shoulders bent with exhaustion, one hand covering Zuri's foot under the blanket as if she needed physical proof that her daughter was still there. Omar told himself he was standing there because he needed to monitor the hospital's handling of the case. He knew that was only half true. The other half made no sense, and that was precisely why it irritated him. A soft step approached from behind. It was Baba Jengo, the older security guard assigned to the pediatric wing. He was tall despite his age, with a weathered face and patient eyes that had clearly witnessed more human desperation than the hospital directors ever had. "Sir," he said gently, "the specialist from Nairobi has joined the morning review." Omar nodded. "Good." Baba hesitated, then added, "The child is brave." Omar's gaze remained on the room beyond the glass. Children should not need bravery in hospitals. The old man gave a slow, thoughtful nod. "No, sir, but the poor often need it everywhere." Then he moved on. Omar looked back at Zuri. As if sensing something, she stirred in her sleep. Her fingers tightened weakly around the edge of the blanket. Amina leaned forward, immediately smoothing the girl's hair, whispering something too soft to hear through the glass. That tenderness hit Omar in a place he had not prepared to defend. He turned away sharply. By 8 in the morning, the specialists had assembled in a conference room on the pediatric floor. Omar listened as they reviewed scans, blood work, and prior treatment notes. "It appears she has been mismanaged for months," said one pediatric pulmonologist, frustration sharpening his tone. "Repeated breathing crises, persistent inflammation, possible underlying congenital issue, and no proper specialist intervention." Omar's eyes narrowed. Because her mother could not pay. No one answered immediately. That silence was answer enough. Another doctor cleared his throat. "The child also shows a rare hypersensitivity pattern. It complicates medication selection." Omar looked up. "What pattern?" The doctor opened the file. "An unusual reaction cluster to a common antibiotic family. It is uncommon but not unheard of." Omar stared at the page for 1 second too long. A faint memory surfaced: his own childhood age, 6, a fever, his mother shouting because he had gone rigid after a medication reaction, 3 doctors debating the rarity of the response. It was one of the reasons his family's private physicians had documented his medical profile obsessively for years. He sat back slowly. "Is there a genetic component?" he asked. The doctor frowned. "Sometimes familial predisposition is involved, yes." Omar said nothing. He did not like the sudden awareness moving beneath his skin. Coincidences existed. Medicine was full of them. Human beings saw patterns because the brain feared chaos. That was all. And yet. He closed the file. "Whatever testing she needs," he said, "do it. I want the best team, no delays, no cost barriers." "Of course, Mr. Diallo." When the meeting ended, Omar walked back toward the ward and found Zuri awake. The door to her room was half open. Amina was speaking to a nurse near the medication cart, arguing quietly over dosage timing. Inside the room, Zuri lay propped against her pillow, looking smaller than any child should in such a large hospital bed. But she was awake and watching the doorway. The moment she saw Omar, something changed in her face. Children smiled at powerful men all the time when told to. They performed charm because adults expected gratitude. This was not that. There was no calculation in it, only instant, fragile brightness. "You came back," she said. Her voice was still thin, but it carried. Omar stopped at the threshold. For some reason, he answered more softly than he intended. "Yes?" She glanced past him, then lowered her voice as though sharing a secret. "I thought maybe rich people only help one time." Something dark moved through him at that. He stepped inside. "Who told you that?" Zuri shrugged carefully. "No one. It just happens." Omar had negotiated with ministers, buried hostile takeovers, dismantled rivals with a sentence and a signature. Yet that small answer unsettled him more than any boardroom confrontation. He pulled the visitor's chair a little closer to the bed. "How are you feeling, are you?" She considered the question seriously, like an adult trapped in a child's body. "My chest hurts less. But Mama's still scared." At the medication cart, Amina stiffened. She knew they were speaking, yet she did not turn. Omar glanced toward her, then back to the girl. "Your mother loves you." "I know," Zuri said. "That's why she gets scared." There it was again, that strange force in the child. Not just innocence, perception. The ability to say simple things that adults spent years hiding from. She studied him openly now. Children looked without manners, without masks, without mercy. Zuri's gaze moved over his suit, his watch, the scar near his wrist, the sharp line of his jaw. Then it returned to his face and stayed there. "You look tired," she said. One corner of his mouth moved despite himself. "Do I?" She nodded solemnly. "Like Mama. But different." Before he could ask what that meant, she lifted her hand toward him. It was such a small gesture, weak, wordless. Still, it stopped him. He looked at her fingers for 1 second, then placed his hand beneath them so she would not strain herself. Her small palm rested against his skin. A jolt passed through him, not sentiment, not fantasy. Something more physical than that. The shape of her hand. The instinctive way her thumb pressed once near the base of his thumb before relaxing. A habit. A motion so familiar it made his stomach tighten. He used to do that. He had done it all through childhood whenever he was frightened or trying not to show pain. Omar withdrew his hand too quickly. Zuri blinked, confused. "Did I do something wrong?" "No." The word came faster than intended. He moderated his tone. "No, little one. Little one." He had not called anyone that in years. Amina turned then, a medicine cup in her hand, and saw the two of them facing each other in that strange, suspended quiet. Fear crossed her face so quickly most people would have missed it. Omar did not. The nurse left. Amina came to the bedside and handed Zuri the medicine with a practiced smile that only partly hid her tension. "Time to drink this." Zuri made a face. "It smells angry." That almost made Omar laugh. Amina shot him a glance, and for the briefest instant, something old flashed between them. A memory of private jokes, shared amusement, a time before life had turned every soft thing into risk. Then it vanished. Zuri swallowed the medicine and sank back against the pillow, making a heroic expression of suffering. Amina wiped the corner of her mouth, adjusted her blanket, and checked the IV line again, although it did not need checking. She was buying time. Omar could feel it. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the small fabric rabbit someone from the gift shop had rushed to provide, after learning a priority child was on the floor. He had almost left it at the nurse's station. Bringing it into the room felt absurd. Now he held it out. Zuri stared as if he had offered her a kingdom. "For me, yes." She took it with reverent delight, then hugged it to her chest and immediately winced from the effort. Amina moved to help, but Zuri was already smiling again. "I'll name him Storm," she declared. "Why?" Omar asked. "Because he came after the rain." The simplicity of that answer lodged inside him. Amina looked down quickly. Omar watched her. "Does she always do that?" "Do what? Talk like she's older than everyone in the room." Amina's expression softened despite herself. "Only when she wants attention. I heard that Zuri said." For a few seconds the room almost felt normal. Then Omar's gaze dropped to the edge of the blanket, where the hospital gown had shifted slightly above Zuri's knee. He froze. There, just visible on the upper part of her left leg, was a dark, crescent-shaped birthmark, not identical, but close enough. But his sister had one almost the same shape near her shoulder. An uncle had it near the ankle. His grandfather had called it the moon mark, joking that the Diallo family inherited the night itself in their skin. Omar stared too long. Amina saw where he was looking. Every trace of warmth disappeared from her face. In one swift motion, she pulled the blanket down to cover the child fully. "Omar." His eyes lifted to hers. The warning in them was unmistakable. Zuri looked between them, sensing the air shift. Mama Amina forced a smile for her daughter, then turned back to Omar with quiet steel. "She needs rest." He stood slowly. That birthmark could still mean nothing. Families shared myths as often as genes. Memory was dangerous when fed by longing and anger. But the allergic profile, the hand gesture, the timing, the eyes, and now this. He moved toward the door, then paused. "When was her last full medical review before this hospital?" he asked without turning around. Amina did not answer immediately. Finally, she said, "That is not your concern." Omar looked back. Her face was controlled now, but too controlled. The expression of someone holding shut a door while a flood pushed from the other side. He gave one small nod. "All right." But inside everything had changed, because for the first time the suspicion no longer felt ridiculous. It felt dangerous, and somewhere beyond the walls of the room, unseen but watchful, Selina Okoro stood at the end of the corridor, pretending to review patient charts while listening to every second she could. When Omar walked past her, she lowered her eyes respectfully. But her grip on the folder in her hands tightened. She had seen that look in powerful men before. It was the look of someone moving from curiosity to certainty. And certainty, Selina knew, could destroy everything. By late afternoon, Mercy Crown Hospital had become a battlefield disguised as a place of healing. The pediatric floor remained quiet on the surface, but tension had spread through the building like smoke. Phones rang more urgently. Meetings were called behind closed doors. Staff who had once spoken carelessly now chose each word as if their jobs depended on grammar. In a way they did. Omar Diallo had not raised his voice once all day. That frightened people more than shouting ever could. He had spent the last several hours inside a temporary office the hospital director had surrendered to him, reviewing records from the emergency fund vendor payments. Treatment delays and admissions flagged for financial non-compliance. Every page revealed the same rot wearing a different disguise. Children had been denied urgent care while executives approved decorative renovations. Donations earmarked for respiratory machines had vanished into consulting contracts. Emergency waivers existed on paper, but had been quietly buried in practice. And threaded through all of it again and again was one name: Selina Okoro. Her authorization code appeared on approvals that should never have passed. Her digital signature sat beneath policy changes that gave billing officers more power over admission decisions. She had built a system where mercy required permission and poverty became a crime. Omar closed the last file and leaned back slowly. Any other day, that alone would have been enough to command his full attention. But today another file kept intruding into his mind, the invisible one, the one made of eyes, timelines, tremors, and a crescent-shaped mark hidden beneath a blanket. A knock came at the door. "Come in." Baba Jengo entered first, followed by a nurse with a clipboard. "So the mother is asking whether she may collect her daughter's older test results from reception. The records office says they were archived incorrectly." Incorrectly. Incompetence was the most common mask corruption war. Omar took the clipboard, skimmed the note, and set it down. "Bring the archived records to me." The nurse hesitated. "To you, sir?" "Yes." She left quickly. Baba remained by the door. "You do not trust this place." Omar let out a humorless breath. "I trust that people protect themselves first." The old man studied him for a moment. "Sometimes they protect others first. It only looks like betrayal from the outside." Omar's gaze hardened. "Is that a proverb or advice, age, sir?" Then Baba bowed his head slightly and withdrew. Omar stared after him. He disliked words that sounded wise when he was angry. They had a way of slipping under the skin. Half an hour later, he found Amina in the children's courtyard behind the ward. The rain had stopped, but the sky still hung low and silver over the city. The courtyard was little more than a square of trimmed grass. 2 benches and a rusting swing set no sick child had the strength to use. Amina stood near the fence, one hand pressed flat against the metal rail, the other wrapped around herself, as if she were holding her body together by force. She must have heard his steps, but she did not turn immediately. Omar stopped a few feet behind her. "You left her alone," with a nurse, Amina said. "For 5 minutes. That is longer than you have wanted her out of your sight all day." Now she turned. The exhaustion in her face was more visible in daylight. Dark crescents beneath her eyes, lips dry from stress. The stubborn straightness of someone who had been sodded in without breaking for too long. "What do you want, Omar? Truth," he nearly said. "Instead, your daughter's older records were archived incorrectly." Amina's expression changed too fast. There it was again, that flash of alarm she could never fully hide. "I can handle my daughter's papers. I'm sure you have handled everything alone for years." The words came out sharper than he intended. They hit their mark anyway. Amina drew herself up. "Do not do that. Do what speak as if you know what my life has been." Omar stepped closer. "Then tell me." She laughed once, but there was no amusement in it. "That is rich. I asked you simple questions, Amina. You have answered none of them honestly." Her eyes flashed. "You want honesty now?" "Yes. For whose sake? Mine, yours. Or because you finally found a mystery that bruises your pride?" His jaw tightened. She saw it and pressed on, trembling but fearless now that anger had given her something stronger than fear. "You were always like this. If something did not make sense to you, you would chase it until you could force it into logic, into shape, into obedience. But life does not always explain itself in ways men like you can control. Men like me. Yes, men who think power is the same as understanding." For a second, the old version of them flickered between the new wounds the young man and woman who had once argued passionately about everything from politics to poetry, and then laughed 10 seconds later because they loved each other too much to stay angry. That memory only made what stood between them now more brutal. Omar's voice lowered. 5 years ago, you disappeared." Amina said nothing. "You changed your number. You left your apartment. You vanished from every place I knew you. Do you know what that does to a person?" Pain moved through her face. "I did not leave because it was easy." "Then why?" She looked away. The courtyard seemed to hold its breath with him. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost all its anger. "Because staying would have destroyed everything." Omar stared at her. "Destroyed what?" Her fingers tightened around the railing. Me. It was the first true thing she had given him that day, and somehow it enraged him more than another lie would have. "Do not talk to me in fragments. I am not a stranger you met in a corridor." "No," she said softly. "You are exactly why fragments are all I have left." He took another step toward her. Was there someone else? The question came from a place he despised in himself. Old humiliation. Old poison. Old nights spent imagining betrayal, because betrayal was easier to survive than abandonment without reason. Amina looked at him with naked disbelief. "After everything, that is still what you think you tell me." Her eyes filled not with shame, but with a grief so deep it made him regret the question at once. "I thought about you every day," she whispered, "even when I wanted to hate you, even when I told myself your name had become dangerous, even when surviving required me to erase every part of my life that led back to you." Omar went still. She had not meant to say that much. He could see it the moment the words escaped. But now they hung between them, raw and undeniable. For one dangerous second he almost reached for her. Then he remembered the child, the age, the lies, the blanket dragged down too quickly over the birthmark. He hardened again. "When you left," he said, "were you pregnant?" Amina closed her eyes. The answer was in that silence, long, long before it reached her mouth. "Yes." The word landed like thunder in a clear sky. Omar felt the world narrow. Every sound in the courtyard receded: the distant trolley wheels, the low generator hum, the birds on the hospital wall. There was only her face, and that one terrible truth opening beneath his feet. He spoke with effort. "And you never told me." A tear slipped down her cheek. She wiped it away angrily. "I could not." "You mean you chose not to?" "I was trying to survive." "And I was what?" "A risk, a weakness, an inconvenience." Amina shook her head, breathing unsteadily. "You were the one thing that made leaving impossible." The answer hit too close to love, too close to old tenderness. He rejected it on instinct. Then why leave at all? She stared at him as if wrestling herself. Because this was the edge Omar understood, the place where truth could come out or be buried forever. He waited. Amina's lips trembled. Then, with visible force, she locked whatever had risen in her back behind her eyes. When she spoke again, the warmth was gone. "The child was not yours." It was as if the sky itself had cracked. For a full second, Omar did not react. He simply looked at her, because the human mind sometimes protects itself by refusing to understand what it has heard. Then understanding came, and with it something inside him went cold. Not loud cold, not explosive. Worse, the kind that turned blood into metal. He gave one slow nod. "Say it again." Amina's face was pale now, but she held his gaze. "The child was not yours." Every instinct in him screamed that she was lying. The timing was wrong for coincidence. The fear in her was wrong for truth. The way she had covered the child's leg, avoided his questions. Panicked at every similarity, it all pointed in the opposite direction. And yet hearing the words from her mouth was like being cut open with an old blade. He laughed once, a low, disbelieving sound that contained no humor at all. "So that is what I was to you." Her expression cracked. "Omar, no." His voice sharpened. "Do not soften it now." He stepped back from her as though distance were the only thing keeping him from saying something unforgivable. 5 years, he said. 5 years of silence. Then I find you in a hospital with a child whose age fits the timeline perfectly, and you tell me she belongs to another man. Amina did not answer. That silence condemned her more than words. Omar looked away toward the pediatric windows above them. Somewhere behind one of those panes, Zuri was lying in bed with a toy rabbit in her arms. Somewhere above them, a child with his eyes, Or perhaps not, if Amina was to be believed, was breathing because he had arrived in time. He turned back to her. "Who was he?" Amina flinched. "Do not ask me that. Why? Because he exists or because he does not?" Her face changed again. For the briefest instant, fear overtook control. That was enough. Omar saw it, stored it, understood more from that single fracture than from the lie itself. Before either of them could speak again, a voice cut across the courtyard. "Mr. Diallo." Selina Okoro stood in the doorway holding a folder to her chest, her expression appropriately urgent, appropriately grave, appropriately careful. "We found additional documents in the archived maternal records. I thought you should see them immediately." Omar never took his eyes off Amina, but he answered Selina, "I'm coming." Then to Amina in a voice so low it almost hurt to hear, "You are hiding something bigger than shame." Amina's breath caught. Omar stepped past her. "And I promise you this," he said. "I will find it." He left her standing alone by the railing, one hand pressed to her mouth, while above them, beyond glass and steel and old lies, the evening light drained slowly from the sky. Selina Okoro did not lead Omar to the records office. She led him somewhere quieter. That was the first thing he noticed. Instead of taking the main corridor lined with nurses' stations and glass partitions, she guided him through an administrative hallway at the back of the pediatric wing, where the lights were dimmer and the walls carried framed donor photographs meant to suggest virtue. Their footsteps echoed against marble too polished for a hospital that claimed budget strain. Selina held the archive folder against her chest with both hands. Her face was composed, her pace measured, but Omar had spent too many years studying people who smiled while preparing damage. He saw the tightness at the corners of her mouth. He saw the way she checked whether anyone stood within earshot before stopping outside a locked consultation room. She opened the door and stood aside. "Inside, please." Omar entered without comment. The room was small, private, and soundproofed enough for bad decisions. A glass table stood in the center. 2 chairs faced each other. There were no patient files on the shelves, no diagnostic monitors, no reason for archived records to be reviewed there instead of in an office. Selina closed the door gently behind them. Omar turned. "Why here?" She placed the folder on the table. "Because what's inside may affect more than hospital policy." He said nothing. Selina took a slow breath, then opened the folder. Inside were photocopies, older admission slips, handwritten notes, and one sealed envelope, yellowed slightly at the edges. These records were not filed with the child's current case, she said. They were buried in an inactive maternal support archive from years ago. Omar's gaze sharpened. "Maternal?" "Yes." She slid one document toward him. It was an intake form from a low-cost women's clinic, dated a little over 5 years earlier. The patient name, Amina Njeri. The pregnancy had been marked high risk due to stress complications and relocation instability. Under emergency contact, the space had been left blank. Omar read the date again. And again. Then he lifted his eyes. "You knew?" Selina's face did not move. "I suspected." The answer was careful enough to be insulting. "How long?" "I only became certain there was a connection when I saw you with the child yesterday." "Connection," Omar repeated coldly. "Interesting word." Selina folded her hands. "Mr. Diallo, before you assume the worst of the hospital, you should understand that some old files carry names that powerful families prefer to keep hidden." There it was. Not confession. Positioning. Omar leaned back slightly. "Go on." Selina watched him with the calculating caution of someone trying to decide how much truth would purchase safety. 5 years ago, she said, Amina Njeri appeared at one of the affiliated women's clinics with almost nothing. She was pregnant, frightened, and clearly avoiding someone. She refused legal aid, refused to name the father, refused to stay in one address long enough for case follow-up. It caused complications. Why were you involved? I was not director then, but I managed foundation-linked outreach compliance. Files with unusual sensitivity crossed my desk. Omar looked down at the intake note again. Amina's name on the page felt like a door opening into a buried part of his life. He remembered the last week before she vanished, missed calls. Strange silences, the look in her eyes, the last time they had argued. At the time, he had mistaken it for indecision. He saw now that it had probably been fear, or so he wanted to believe. He kept his voice flat. Who flagged the file as sensitive? Selina hesitated. That was all the answer he needed. Omar's tone sharpened. Name. Selina lowered her eyes as if reluctant. There were inquiries from outside the clinic. A woman from the Diallo household made contact through legal intermediaries. A stillness entered the room. Not surprise. Not exactly. Omar had been raised by Mariam Diallo. He knew the reach of her will, the elegance of her cruelty, the way she preferred hands to be dirtied by people whose names never reached her own doorstep. If she had discovered Amina's pregnancy interference would not merely be possible, it would be inevitable. Still hearing the shape of it made something violent move in his chest. He said very quietly, "My mother." Selina did not confirm it directly. The instruction was discreet. No scandal, no media, no association with the family name. And Nadia. This time Selina looked surprised that he had reached there so fast. Then she masked it. There were messages from a Ms. Mensah as well. Nadia. Of course. Beautiful, strategic Nadia Mensah, whose family had spent years circling the Diallos like polished vultures in silk. Nadia, who had once smiled at Amina with warm venom. Nadia, who always understood that the easiest way to win in elite society was to remove a rival before the rival realized a game was being played. Omar stood and moved away from the table. Through the consultation room's narrow window, he could see nothing but a strip of darkening sky. His reflection looked back at him controlled, expensive, dangerous. Yet beneath that surface, older images had begun to break open. Amina crying in the rain outside his university lecture hall and insisting she was fine. Amina refusing to attend one of his family dinners after receiving a call she would never explain. His mother asking far too casually whether that scholarship girl understood the difference between affection and ambition. At the time, Omar had dismissed each incident as separate cruelty. The ordinary class prejudice of powerful people who believed kindness should move downward only in charity, never sideways in love. Now the fragments were rearranging themselves into something far darker. He turned back. What exactly did they do? Selina's fingers tightened around the edge of the folder. There were pressures, legal threats, suggestions that custody could become complicated if the child was born with the father's identity tied to a wealthy family. There were concerns about inheritance, reputation, public image. Concerns, Omar repeated. Selina did not meet his eyes. He understood then that she was still choosing language that protected institutions over truth. She said pressure when she meant coercion. She said concerns when she meant greed. She said public image when she meant cruelty wrapped in silk gloves. He crossed the room in 2 steps. Who delivered those threats to Amina? Selina swallowed. A physician helped mediate documentation. Name: Dr. Kato Mbeki. Omar's expression changed. Dr. Kato was a respected obstetric consultant in private circles, now a polished specialist who appeared at charity galas and spoke publicly about maternal health reform. Omar himself had shaken his hand twice in the last 3 years. The thought made his skin crawl. He altered records, not entirely. Selina said carefully. He framed information selectively. He emphasized scenarios most likely to frighten a vulnerable woman. Loss of custody risk, legal entanglement, possible character attacks in court. He encouraged her to disappear before the child was born. Omar stared at her. She obeyed because she was alone. The sentence came out of him before he meant to say it. Selina lifted her eyes then, and for 1 second something close to honesty entered her face. Yes, that one word hit harder than the rest, because until then some hard-wounded part of him had still clung to the ugliest version of Amina's departure, that she had chosen flight because she had stopped loving him, that she had seen in him another rich man who would one day become his mother, that she had found someone else, anything easier than this, but alone. The image of it arrived with brutal clarity. Amina carrying a child terrified, cornered by people with money lawyers and social influence she could never match. No father beside her, no safe family fortune behind her, no certainty that Omar, young ambitious, still bound to the Diallo machine in ways he barely understood, then could protect her against his own blood. He placed both hands flat on the glass table and bowed his head for a second. When he looked up, the grief had hardened into focus. "And you," he said. "Where were you in all this?" Selina froze. The question cut clean through her careful neutrality. "I was following directives." "No. You were participating. I was junior then. You were still human." She had no answer to that. Silence gathered heavily between them. At last Omar looked again at the yellowed sealed envelope still resting in the folder. "What is that?" Selina hesitated. It was never delivered. He reached for it. She moved too quickly. "Mr. Diallo, perhaps you should—" He took the envelope from the file before she could stop him. On the front in handwriting he knew at once, despite the years, were 3 words for Omar only. His breath caught. Amina's handwriting. He turned the envelope over. The seal had been broken once and resealed carelessly. Not by Amina. His eyes lifted slowly to Selina. "You opened this." Her silence admitted it. "Who else read it?" "No one recently." Recently. He almost smiled at the word because it was such a coward's choice. Omar slid one finger beneath the flap and opened the envelope fully. Inside was a single folded page. The paper trembled once in his hand before becoming still again. He read. By the second line, the room disappeared. Amina had written the letter 5 years ago, late in pregnancy, after being told she had little time to decide whether to run or face a custody battle she was certain she would lose. The letter was unfinished in places, stained as though tears or rain had blurred sections. But one truth burned through every line. She had loved him. She had not left because she stopped. She had left because she had been made to believe staying would cost her the child. And in one half-legible passage, she had written the sentence that shattered what remained of his pride. "If one day our daughter asks why I kept her away from you, I pray she never thinks it was because she was unwanted. She was born from the truest love I have ever known. Our daughter." Omar lowered the page slowly. His face had gone completely still. Selina whispered, "I thought you should see it before what? Before he destroyed her." Before she repositioned herself as helpful witness instead of collaborator, he folded the letter with painstaking care and slipped it into his inner jacket pocket. Then he looked at Selina in a way that made her step back without meaning to. "You buried this. I was trying to survive the system. You helped build it." "Mr. Diallo." He cut across her. "My mother, Nadia Mensah, Dr. Kato Mbeki. Every transfer, every message, every meeting, every file alteration. I want all of it. Not summaries, not edited versions, everything." Selina's voice thinned. "That could expose very important people." Omar's gaze became glacial. "That is the point." He moved toward the door. Behind him, Selina made one last attempt at self-preservation. Amina may still not trust you, she said. After what she endured, love may not be enough now. Omar paused with one hand on the door handle. When he answered, his voice was low and lethal. This stopped being only about love the moment my child suffered for other people's vanity. He opened the door and left her alone in the consultation room with the donor portraits, the polished table, and the silence of a system that had finally miscalculated. Because down the corridor, beyond the lies, beyond the files, beyond the years already stolen, one truth now stood clear and irreversible. Amina had not betrayed him first, his own world had. The crisis began just after midnight. Hospitals had their own kind of darkness at that hour, not silence, never silence, but a thinner layer of sound, as if fear itself had learned to whisper. The overhead lights in the pediatric wing had been dimmed. Monitors blinked like sleepless eyes. Rainwater still clung to the outer windows in silver streaks from the previous storm, turning the city beyond into something blurred and unreachable. Omar had not gone home. He stood in the records office, 2 floors below Ward 7, reviewing the first batch of files Selina had surrendered under threat of immediate suspension. Transfer logs, internal emails, approval chains, a private phone register connecting hospital administrators to external legal representatives. He had just found Nadia Mensah's number listed under a disguised contact name when the intercom shattered the stillness. Code Blue Ward 7. Pediatric respiratory distress. Code Blue Ward 7. For one frozen second, Omar did not move. Then the file slipped from his hand. By the time he reached the corridor, doctors and nurses were already running toward Zuri's room. A crash cart rattled over the floor. Someone shouted for suction. Another voice called for the pediatric intensivist. Amina's scream cut through all of it. "No, Zuri, look at me." Omar pushed through the growing crowd. The sight inside the room struck him with surgical violence. Zuri's small body arched weakly against the bed as she fought for air that would not stay in her lungs. Her face had gone frighteningly pale beneath her deep brown skin. The monitor screamed in irregular spikes. A respiratory nurse held the mask tight over her mouth, while a doctor checked the airway line. Another nurse was trying to secure fresh access for emergency medication. Amina was beside the bed, one hand clutching her daughter's shoulder, crying so hard she could barely form words. "I'm here, baby. Mama's here. Please, Mom, step back." The doctor snapped. She did not. She could not. Her whole body was trying to climb into the bed with the child. Omar moved instinctively, catching Amina by the shoulders before she stumbled into the equipment. She fought him at first, wild with terror. Let me go! Let me go! They need space," he said, though his own voice sounded far away to him. "She needs me. I know." It was the truest thing he had said all night. Amina turned in his grip, eyes wide and wet and full of raw animal panic. For one impossible second, she looked exactly as she had years ago, during the only fight Omar had ever seen her lose, a university protest turned violent tear gas in the air, fear and fury making her shake. Back then he had held her while she trembled and promised nothing would happen to her while he was there. Tonight the promise meant less than nothing, because something was happening, and he had arrived 5 years too late. Inside the room, the lead pediatrician barked, "Her oxygen saturation is crashing. Prepare for emergency transfer to PICU." Another doctor looked up. "We may need blood support. Cross-match immediately." The words seemed to strike the room differently. One nurse glanced at the chart, then at Amina, then at Omar. There was difficulty finding a compatible profile in the previous review, she said quickly. The child's medication hypersensitivity pattern complicates intervention. Omar's mind caught on one phrase only. Compatible profile. The same cold intuition that had stalked him since the first night rose now with brutal clarity. He looked at the doctor. "Test me." Everyone turned. The doctor blinked. Sir, for compatibility, test me now. Amina stared at him as if he had spoken another language. No, she whispered. Omar looked at her. No. Not thank you. Not wait. Not even fear. No. Because she knew. That single syllable moved through him like a blade finally finding bone. The doctor stepped closer, trying to remain clinical. Mr. Diallo, in a crisis, we can run an urgent blood typing comparison and where relevant a rapid kinship-based compatibility assessment for treatment decisions if consent and legal grounds are sufficient. Do it, Omar said. Amina shook her head violently. No, you can't. Her panic had shifted now. It was no longer only the terror of a mother watching her child stop breathing. It was the terror of a woman watching the wall she had built for years begin to collapse in public. Omar's chest tightened. He spoke quietly, but there was iron under every word. Amina. She pressed both hands over her mouth and cried harder. The doctor looked between them once understood enough and made the decision. Medicine often forced before emotion could catch up. We do not have time for a debate, he said. Run the samples. 2 nurses moved at once. What followed felt both immediate and endless. Zuri was rushed toward the pediatric intensive care unit. The bed wheels thundered over the corridor floor. Amina stumbled after them, one hand stretched toward the child, until the ICU doors shut in her face. Omar signed 3 consent forms without reading them because his name seemed to have become a weapon, a shield, a passport through locked systems. Blood was drawn from him in a side room under fluorescent lights that made everyone look sick already. He barely felt the needle. He only felt time. Amina stood a few feet away with her back against the wall, her arms wrapped around herself so tightly it looked painful. She had gone almost silent now, but silence in grief could be more frightening than screams. It meant the body was conserving strength for a blow it believed had not yet fully landed. Omar watched the vial fill with his blood. Dark, certain, unarguable. When the nurse sealed it, he heard himself ask, "How long?" The lab technician answered carefully, aware of exactly who he was speaking to. Urgent compatibility first, very soon. Formal rapid DNA confirmation longer, but with this level of priority faster than normal. Formal DNA confirmation. The phrase entered the air and stayed there. Amina closed her eyes. That was when Omar knew there would be no more lies tonight. Not because she was finally ready to tell the truth, but because truth had already begun moving through machines, through centrifuges, through test panels and comparison software, through the cold efficiency of science that did not care who a family wanted to protect. The next hour became a corridor of suspended suffering. Amina sat once and stood again immediately. Omar took phone calls and ended them without memory of what he had said. Baba Django appeared with water neither of them drank. Selina was nowhere visible, which told Omar she was already protecting herself. Somewhere else in the hospital, people were probably deleting messages, calling lawyers, rehearsing innocence. None of it mattered, not compared to the closed ICU doors. At 2:13 a.m., the pediatric intensivist emerged first. Amina reached him before he had fully removed his cap. "My daughter." "She is still critical," he said, with the grave precision of a man trained not to offer hope cheaply. "But the immediate collapse has been stabilized. We are monitoring her response closely." Amina broke into tears of relief so intense her knees nearly gave way. Omar caught her before she fell. This time she did not fight his hands. She let herself lean there for one terrible second, as if her body had forgotten they were no longer allowed to belong to each other, even in grief. Then she pulled away. Minutes later, a laboratory specialist arrived with a sealed packet and an expression far too careful to be casual. "Mr. Diallo." Omar stood. The specialist glanced at Amina, then back at him. "May we speak privately?" "No," Omar said. Amina's head lifted slowly. The man hesitated. The urgent compatibility panel indicates a highly significant biological correlation consistent with close paternal relation. The rapid DNA confirmation has also returned. Silence entered the corridor like a living thing. The specialist opened the packet. His next sentence changed everything. The probability that you are the biological father of the child Zurinjeri is greater than 99.99%. Amina made a sound Omar would remember for the rest of his life. Not quite a sob. Not quite surrender. Something deeper. The sound of a secret finally breaking under its own weight. Omar did not move. For a moment he could not. The corridor, the lights, the walls, the expensive hospital with its polished corruption. All of it seemed to recede from him until there was only one fact left in the world. My child. Not abstract, not symbolic, not possible. His child, a daughter, 5 years old, frightened of hospitals, brave with pain, quick to trust him for reasons she herself did not understand. Carrying his eyes, his childhood allergy pattern, his family's moonmark, his hand gesture, his blood. The realization did not come with triumph. It came with devastation, because every confirming detail was also an accusation. While he was building empires, she had been building survival. While he was attending charity galas, his daughter had been turned away from care. While he was resenting Amina for abandoning him, Amina had been carrying the weight of terror, poverty, motherhood, and secrecy alone. Omar lowered himself into the nearest chair, as if the structure of his own body had momentarily failed. He stared at nothing. The specialist quietly retreated. No one else spoke. At last, Omar looked up at Amina. She stood with tears streaming down her face, no longer trying to hide them, no longer trying to hold together the version of events she had forced herself to live inside. "I was going to tell you," she whispered. He said nothing. Her voice cracked. 1,000 times I tried. When she was born, on her first birthday, when she got sick the first time, when she asked why other children had fathers in school pictures and she didn't. I tried Omar. That was what finally undid him. Not the DNA report, not even the lost years. It was that small image, Amina trying alone, over and over, with no safe way forward. He stood again slowly this time. Why, he asked, and the word was shattered despite his effort to steady it. Why did you believe I would let this happen? Amina looked at him with unbearable grief. I didn't think you would, she said. I thought your family would. And I had no power to survive them if they decided to take her. He closed his eyes briefly, because now he understood the true scale of the crime. It was not only that they had separated two lovers, they had turned love itself into a threat. They had weaponized his name so completely that the woman who once trusted him most had come to fear what being connected to him would do to her child. When he opened his eyes again, the softness was gone. What remained was colder than grief and far more useful. He looked toward the ICU doors, then back at Amina. You should have never had to protect her from me, he said. A tearful silence answered him. And now he continued each word, turning sharper. Everyone who made you think you had to will answer for it. In the distance, somewhere deep in the sleeping hospital, a phone began to ring. Then another. Then another. As if the building itself had sensed what had just been born inside it, not just truth but reckoning. Reckoning began before sunrise. By 5 a.m, Mercy Crown Hospital no longer felt like a private institution serving the elite. It felt like a fortress under siege from the truth. Security protocols were tightened. Senior administrators were summoned back to the building. Legal teams began arriving in dark cars with tinted windows. Phones that had once been used to delay care and erase paperwork now rang with urgency, because everyone understood the same brutal fact. Omar Diallo was no longer investigating a corruption case. He was hunting the people who had stolen 5 years of his daughter's life. And he was doing it from inside the building where that theft had finally exposed itself. Zuri remained in the pediatric intensive care unit, still critical, but stable enough for observation. Amina had refused to leave the glass doors of the ICU waiting area. She sat on a narrow bench with both hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles had gone pale. The rabbit Omar had given Zuri Storm rested beside her like a witness. Omar stood a few feet away, speaking in a low, controlled voice to 3 men from his corporate legal division and the head of internal compliance for the Diallo Foundation. "I want immediate preservation orders," he said. "All hospital servers, all phone records connected to Selina Okoro Kojo Bemba, and every foundation-linked administrator from the last 6 years. No file deletions, no account closures, deepens. Not private settlements." One of the lawyers adjusted his glasses. "Sir, if members of your family are implicated, we may want to contain the scope until we understand." Omar looked at him. That was enough. The lawyer lowered his eyes. "Understood." Also, Omar continued, "Freeze all discretionary fund authority tied to Mercy Crown and every affiliated maternal clinic. Effective now." "Yes, sir." The compliance officer hesitated. "And Madam Mariam Diallo." The air changed. Even Amina looked up. Omar's face became perfectly still. "No one informs my mother before I do." The men nodded and left. For a moment, only the ICU ventilation system hummed between Omar and Amina. Exhaustion had stripped both of them down to essentials. There was no room left now for performance, only for damage. Amina looked at him, eyes swollen from crying. "You're moving too fast." He turned toward her. 5 years was slow enough. "That is not what I mean." "Then say what you mean." She stood. There was no strength in the movement, only urgency. "Your family will not stay quiet. Nadia will not stay quiet. The moment they realize you know the truth, they will try to bury everything deeper. They will turn me into the liar, the gold digger, the unstable woman who trapped a powerful man with a child." Omar's jaw tightened. "Let them try. You say that because you still think power protects people." Her voice shook, but it did not break. "It protects the people who already have it." He stared at her. That sentence would have wounded him even if it were false. What made it unbearable was that part of it was true. For years, Omar had believed power made him independent. He now understood how often it had merely insulated him from the cost other people paid. Before he could answer, a sharp clicking of heels cut down the corridor. Every nurse at the station looked up first, then every orderly. Then Amina went pale. Mariam Diallo arrived like a verdict. She wore a cream silk suit despite the early hour, dark glasses despite the fluorescent lights, and the kind of composed elegance that made cruelty look well-bred. 2 assistants followed half a step behind her, carrying phones and folders they would likely never be asked to understand. She removed her glasses with slow precision as she approached, and her gaze landed first on Omar, then on Amina, with a flicker of recognition so brief that anyone who did not know her might have missed it. Omar did not. So she had known Amina was here before this moment. Of course she had. Omar Mariam said, her voice low and controlled. "I came as soon as I heard there was a complication." "Do not insult me with language like that," Omar said. The assistants froze. Amina instinctively stepped back as though Mariam's presence still carried the old power to erase her from a room. Mariam's eyes shifted to her. For one ugly second, all the years between them disappeared, and Omar could see exactly how this had happened. One woman cushioned by status, another cornered by survival, and between them, a system built to ensure only one of them would ever be believed. Mariam returned her attention to her son. "This is a hospital, not a courtroom." "No," Omar said. It became a crime scene the day your instructions reached its files. The nearest nurse inhaled sharply. Mariam's expression did not change, but her pupils narrowed. I don't know what you think you've found. I've found enough. Omar, I found maternal records buried under false archive codes. I found legal pressure, routed through intermediaries. I found Dr. Kato Mbeki manipulating medical fear into obedience. I found Nadia Mensah's messages in sealed administrative channels. His voice remained quiet, which made every word feel harder. And I found a letter meant for me that was opened hidden and left to rot because you and your allies preferred a child without a father to a family you could not control. The silence after that seemed to shake the corridor. Amina lowered her eyes. Mariam looked at her for a long moment, then back at Omar. You are emotional. That makes you vulnerable to narratives designed to provoke guilt. The sentence was so cold, so polished, that Omar almost admired its precision. Almost. Instead he said, She is my daughter. For the first time, Mariam lost complete command of her face, only for an instant. But the crack was there. Her gaze slid toward the ICU doors, where beyond glass and machines her granddaughter lay fighting for breath. When she spoke again, her tone had changed, not softer, but strategic. If that is true, then we must consider what is best for the child. Amina laughed, then a small, broken sound full of disbelief. Mariam ignored her. The girl carries the Diallo name now, whether the public knows it yet or not. There will be inheritance implications, security implications, media exposure. She cannot remain in unstable conditions with her mother. Omar finished. Mariam lifted her chin. With someone unequipped to navigate what this child now represents. Amina went white, and Omar understood with total clarity that his mother was not here to apologize, not here to confess, not even here to defend herself. She was here to regain control. The little girl in the ICU was already becoming a legal asset in her mind. He stepped forward. You will never speak about Amina that way again. Mariam held his gaze. You would choose a woman who hid your child over your own family? No, Omar said. I am choosing the family you tried to destroy. The words landed like a slap. One of Mariam's assistants shifted backward without realizing it. Amina stared at Omar, stunned, not because she suddenly trusted him fully, but because she had likely never imagined hearing him say that out loud in front of witnesses. Mariam's composure tightened into something sharper. You are confusing shame with righteousness. Whatever happened years ago, it was handled to prevent scandal. Omar's expression darkened. You mean to prevent embarrassment. It was not appropriate. There is a child in intensive care because you decided appropriateness mattered more than humanity. That is melodrama. No, Amina said suddenly. Both Diallos turned toward her. She had been quiet too long. Fear had carried her for years, but fear could not survive indefinitely inside a mother who had watched her child nearly die. Amina stepped forward. She was exhausted, underdressed, and visibly shaking. Yet in that corridor she looked more powerful than the silk and assistants and family prestige across from her. It was not scandal you feared, she said. It was me. Mariam's face hardened. You were a distraction. I was poor. You were emotional. I was easy to crush. The assistants looked at the floor. Amina's voice grew steadier with each word, as if speaking truth aloud was restoring something that had been stolen from her. You knew I had no family wealth, no lawyers, no public voice. You knew if you frightened me enough, I would run with my child and call it sacrifice. And when I did, you let your son believe I had betrayed him. Mariam replied with icy calm. You still chose to vanish. Amina flinched. Omar saw it and moved at once, not to touch her, not yet, but to stand beside her. Not in front, not above. The difference mattered. She chose under coercion, he said. And you built the coercion. Mariam looked at him as if seeing a stranger wearing her son's face. Perhaps she was, because the Omar she had raised would once have managed this privately, discreetly, elegantly. He would have treated pain as liability and truth as negotiable. He would have preserved the family machine first and addressed morality later, if at all. That man was still in him, but the ICU doors behind them had killed his loyalty to that version. At that moment, Selina Okoro appeared at the far end of the corridor, flanked by 2 compliance officers and one of Omar's lawyers. She slowed when she saw Mariam present. The lawyer approached Omar directly. "Sir, we have enough already to suspend Selina Kojo Bemba and 3 finance officers pending criminal referral. There are also recovered message chains linking outside pressure to hospital decisions. Some appear to involve family offices." Mariam's face turned glacial. Selina tried to speak. "Mr. Diallo." "I can explain the context you already did," Omar said. "Poorly." He turned to the lawyer. "Escort Ms. Okoro to administrative holding. She is not to leave the premises with any device." Selina's mask cracked. "You can't make me a scapegoat while protecting the others. Then don't force me to wonder what else you still haven't said." 2 officers stepped to either side of her. The spectacle sent a ripple through the floor. Staff stared openly now. No one pretended this was routine anymore. Mariam drew herself up, dignity hardening into fury. "You are humiliating this family." Omar looked at her. "No," he said. "The humiliation happened when a child carrying my blood was denied care in a hospital funded by my name, while the people responsible wore ours like a crown. The ICU doors opened then. Every head turned. A doctor emerged, scanning the group with visible discomfort. Only one parent may come in for a short visit." "Parent?" The word struck the corridor like a bell. Amina froze. So did Omar. The doctor looked between them uncertainly, already regretting having walked into a battlefield. Then something small and devastating happened. Without thinking, Amina turned toward Omar, as if to ask whether he would go first. It was instinct. A mother's instinct, yes, but also the instinct of someone who had begun, despite herself, to accept a truth too large to keep refusing. Omar saw it, and for the first time since the DNA result, something softer entered his face. He looked at Amina and said quietly, "You go. Tell her I'm here when she wakes fully." Amina's eyes filled again. She nodded once, then followed the doctor through the doors. Omar remained in the corridor beside the stunned silence of staff, the exposed panic of Selina, and the cold disbelief of Mariam Diallo. Then he turned to his mother one last time. "This is not over," he said. Mariam lifted her chin. "No, it isn't." And for once they both meant the same thing. By noon, the headquarters of Diallo Holdings no longer resembled a corporate tower. It resembled a stage built for collapse. The 42nd floor executive auditorium had been prepared for an emergency foundation briefing. At least that was what the invitation claimed. In reality, every person entering the room could feel that something larger was waiting. Board members arrived with guarded expressions. Senior charity officers whispered in tight circles. Hospital executives sat too straight. Legal advisors checked their phones every few seconds. Outside the glass walls, the city glowed under a pale afternoon sun, bright and indifferent. Inside, the air felt electric. At the center of it stood Omar Diallo. He had changed clothes, but not expression. His suit was charcoal severe, perfectly fitted. His face looked carved from restraint. Anyone who knew him well would have recognized the danger immediately. Omar was at his coldest when he had already decided the outcome, and was merely allowing other people a final chance to reveal how dishonest they were willing to be. Amina sat in the second row with Baba Jengo beside her. She had resisted coming. She had wanted to stay at the hospital, to remain near Zuri's room, to refuse this world of microphones, luxury, and polished lies. But the doctors had convinced her that Zuri was resting under close observation, and Omar had said only one sentence that made refusal impossible. They should hear what their choices did to your child. So she came. Not dressed for war, but carrying its scars. Her plain, dark dress and tied-back hair stood in sharp contrast to the silk jackets and expensive watches around her. Yet if anyone thought that made her small, they had not looked into her eyes for more than a second. Fear was still there. So was exhaustion. But there was something else now, something steadier. The kind of strength born not from power, but from surviving it. At the far side of the room sat Omar Diallo, immaculate as ever, with 2 family lawyers near her, and Nadia Mensah just beyond them. Nadia had arrived 10 minutes earlier in cream tailoring and diamonds, as if elegance itself could function as a defense strategy. She had greeted no one. She had not looked directly at Amina, but every line of her body radiated outrage at being summoned rather than consulted. Selina Okoro sat under visible supervision near the legal table. Her hands were folded too tightly in her lap. Kojo Bemba, the hospital director, had already started sweating through his collar. At exactly 12:30, Omar stepped to the podium. The room fell silent. He did not begin with greetings. He did not thank anyone for attending. He looked across the auditorium and said, "This meeting concerns fraud, coercion, abuse of charitable resources, medical misconduct, and the deliberate destruction of a family for the protection of reputation." The words hit like a physical force. Several people shifted in their seats. One board member reached for a pen, and then thought better of it. Omar continued. "Over the last 24 hours, my office has reviewed emergency funding records, archived maternal clinic files, internal hospital approvals, deleted communication logs recovered from backup servers, and sealed correspondence that should never have been hidden. What began as an investigation into financial misconduct has uncovered something far worse." He paused. Then he said, without softening it, "A child was denied dignity. Safety and timely care, because powerful adults valued control more than truth." Amina felt her throat tighten. Across the room, Nadia's face remained composed, but only just. Omar nodded toward the large screen behind him. "Let's begin with money, since that is the language some people here trust most." A slide appeared. Numbers, transfers, shell vendors, repeated approvals, cross-referenced timestamps. He moved through them with surgical precision. Foundation funds allocated for pediatric emergency intervention had been rerouted through inflated consulting agreements. Equipment budgets had been quietly reduced, while executive hospitality expenses rose. Emergency waivers existed in policy, but were blocked in practice by billing protocols signed through Selina's office and endorsed by Kojo Bemba. Kojo finally snapped. "This is administrative complexity being misrepresented as criminal intent." Omar turned toward him. "Children in respiratory crisis were made to wait while you approved imported marble for donor lounges." A murmur swept the room. Kojo's face turned blotchy. "You can't prove I personally." The next slide appeared. An audio transcript, a recorded internal call. Kojo's own voice saying, "No payment, no admission. If they die, document late arrival and keep billing clean." The silence afterward was monstrous. Kojo looked as if the blood had drained out of him. That was taken out of context. "Then may the prosecutors enjoy the full context," Omar said. He shifted his attention. "Selina Okoro." She stiffened. The screen changed again. Email chains, approval logs, altered archive labels. Omar did not raise his voice. "You buried maternal files connected to Amina Nigeri. You restricted emergency discretionary use. You opened a private letter addressed to me and concealed it. And you facilitated external pressure on medical records." Selina's mouth trembled. I followed directives from above. "Name them." She looked toward Mariam, then toward Nadia. The whole room saw it. Selina closed her eyes once like a gambler, realizing the house had already decided she was expendable. Mariam Diallo's legal office initiated contact through intermediaries. Nadia Mensah sent direct follow-up instructions. Dr. Kato Mbeki handled the medical intimidation. A sharp wave of whispers broke across the auditorium. Nadia rose at once. "This is absurd. She's lying to save herself." Omar nodded slightly as if he had expected that exact line. "Then perhaps your own messages will speak more clearly." A new slide appeared. Screenshots, recovered message chains. Nadia's private number, her phrasing, her urgency. She must disappear before the child becomes a claim. No scandal tied to Omar. Handle the clinic quietly. Nadia's face changed. Not guilt first. Fury. "How dare you access my private communications? How dare you call a child a claim?" Omar replied. That landed harder. Nadia looked around the room, searching for sympathy allies, some face willing to pretend this was merely scandal rather than monstrosity. She found none. Mariam stood then. She did not ask permission. Her voice cut through the room with aristocratic force. "Enough. This public spectacle is beneath the dignity of this company." Omar's gaze moved to her. "No," he said. "What was beneath dignity happened 5 years ago." Mariam did not blink. A vulnerable young woman made decisions under stress. That is regrettable. But retroactively converting family concern into conspiracy does not make it true. Amina rose before Omar could answer. Every eye in the room turned. She did not walk quickly. She walked carefully, each step deliberate, as if she had learned the hard way that shaking and courage could exist in the same body. When she reached the open space near the podium, she faced the room. Not Mariam first, not Nadia, but the entire machine that had once treated her like background noise. "My name is Amina Njeri," she said. Her voice was soft. The microphones carried it anyway. 5 years ago I was pregnant and alone, not because the father of my child had abandoned me, but because I was made to believe that if I stayed, his family would take my baby from me and erase me in court before she was even born. No one moved. Amina looked toward Mariam then. I was threatened with custody battles I could not afford. I was told love would not protect me from lawyers. I was told powerful families always win. Her eyes shifted to Nadia. And I was made to understand that some women do not need to shout to destroy another woman's life. They only need connections, timing, and the confidence that no one will ask what happened to the poor girl after she disappears. Nadia's jaw tightened. You chose to run. Amina's face changed. Pain first, then steel. Yes, she said. I chose under fear. I chose while pregnant. I chose while being cornered by people whose money could have buried me in paperwork before my daughter took her first breath. Do not confuse survival with freedom. The room went utterly still. Then Omar did something no one expected. He stepped away from the podium and stood beside Amina. Not behind it, not above her, beside her. My daughter Zuri Njeri, he said, spent last night in pediatric intensive care. The word seemed to strip the room of air. He let them sit there. Then he added, she almost died in a hospital funded by my foundation while carrying a condition known manageable and worsened by delayed care. At that moment, the rear auditorium doors opened. Several heads turned in irritation. Then the irritation vanished. A pediatric nurse had arrived from Mercy Crown with special permission guiding a small figure in a wheelchair. Zuri, not fully recovered, not strong enough to walk unaided for long, wrapped in a light blanket, with Storm the rabbit tucked in her arms. A portable oxygen line rested beneath her nose. Her eyes looked too large for her face, but they were open and alert. Amina's breath caught. Omar turned sharply, clearly stunned. Why is she here? The nurse answered carefully. She woke up asking for both of you. The doctor approved a short supervised visit. She insisted. The entire room seemed to lose its composure at once, not because of power, because truth had entered in the smallest possible form. Amina rushed to her daughter's side and knelt. Zuri, baby Zuri, touched her mother's cheek. Then she looked up at Omar. "Are you fighting again?" she asked. No one in the room could hide behind professionalism after that. Omar crouched beside her wheelchair. "We're finishing something." Zuri considered this solemnly. Then, with the devastating honesty only children possess, she looked around at the rows of expensive adults and asked, "Why do grown-ups hurt people first and explain later?" No one answered. Not Mariam, not Nadia, not Kojo, not Selina. The question fell into the center of the auditorium and exposed everything language had previously helped hide. Amina lowered her head and cried silently. Omar stood slowly. When he spoke again, his voice had become even quieter. "Effective immediately, Selina Okoro and Kojo Bemba are terminated and referred for criminal investigation. Dr. Kato Mbeki will face civil and criminal action. Nadia Mensah is barred from all Diallo Holdings entities pending prosecution support review. And Mariam Diallo." The room seemed to flinch. He looked directly at his mother. "You will no longer exercise influence, formal or informal, over any foundation, hospital, trust, or family office connected to my name. Full legal review begins today." Mariam stared at him with cold disbelief. "You would disgrace your own mother before strangers." Omar's face did not change. "You disgraced yourself before a child." No one recovered from that sentence. Not even Mariam. In the silence that followed, Zuri leaned weakly against her mother and held Storm tighter. The empire had not collapsed yet, but its mask had, and everyone in the room knew there was no putting it back on. The storm did not end after the auditorium. It changed shape. By evening, the city was already feeding on fragments of the scandal. Anonymous tips had begun reaching journalists. A Foundation whistleblower had confirmed the existence of sealed maternal files. Mercy Crown Hospital released a cautious statement about administrative irregularities, the kind of language institutions used when panic had not yet learned how to confess. On financial channels, analysts speculated about governance fallout at Diallo Holdings. On social media, outrage moved faster than facts. But for once, outrage was not wrong. And still none of that mattered as much as one small room on the 7th floor of Mercy Crown. Zuri had been moved out of intensive care into a private pediatric recovery suite just before sunset. The room was quieter than the ICU warmer too. Someone had brought in fresh curtains in soft yellow to replace the standard grey. A children's mural of painted giraffes and clouds covered one wall, though years of hospital wear had dulled its cheerfulness. A monitor still blinked beside the bed, and the oxygen line remained in place, but the terror of immediate loss had loosened its grip enough for exhaustion to enter. Amina sat in the chair beside the bed, half asleep and half guarding, with one hand on Zuri's blanket and her head tilted at an angle that would punish her neck by morning. Omar stood near the window jacket, off sleeves rolled once, phone face down on the side table. He had ignored 6 calls from legal counsel, 3 from the board, and 1 from a cabinet minister who had suddenly become very concerned about the integrity of charitable healthcare systems. He would answer none of them tonight. Zuri was awake. Not fully alert, not strong, but awake enough to watch the room with quiet curiosity. Her gaze moved from her mother to Omar and back again, with the seriousness of a child who knew something enormous had happened around her, but had not been given the adult language for it. Finally, she said, "Why are you still here?" The question was not rude, only direct. Amina opened her eyes at once. "Zuri." "It's all right," Omar said softly. He came closer to the bed. Zuri looked up at him. Her face was pale with recovery, but her eyes still carried that unsettling steadiness he had not yet learned how to endure without feeling exposed. "Because I want to be," he said. She considered that. Even though the scary part is over. Omar glanced at Amina. She lowered her eyes as if some part of her could not bear to hear how he answered. Yes, he said. Especially then. Zuri accepted that more easily than adults would have. She nodded once, then asked, "Are you my father?" The room stopped breathing. Amina's head snapped up. Omar did not move. There were moments in life that arrived without preparation, moments too large for strategy, too sacred for delay. This was one of them. Amina's lips parted. "Zuri, baby, we were going to explain." "But is he?" Zuri asked, not frightened, only wanting truth. The monitor continued its quiet rhythm beside her. Omar came to the bedside and lowered himself into the chair opposite Amina. He kept his voice calm, not because he felt calm, but because children deserved gentleness even when adults were breaking inside. "Yes," he said. Zuri blinked. Then she looked at his face for a long time, as if reorganizing her world around a missing piece that had just been returned. "Oh," she whispered. "Not shock, not rejection, only oh." Amina covered her mouth and began to cry soundlessly. Zuri turned to her at once. "Mama, did I do something bad?" "No," Amina said quickly, taking her hand. "No, my love. Never. Never." Zuri looked back at Omar. "Did you know before? No. Did Mama know?" The room tightened again. Amina answered, this time voice trembling. "Yes." Zuri frowned slightly, not in anger, but in the effort of thinking through pain medicine, love, fear, all the difficult things children sensed long before they understood them. "Then why didn't you come?" There it was. The simplest question. And the cruelest. Amina closed her eyes. Omar felt the full weight of it descend on him, even though the question had not been accusation. To a child, absence had only one shape. Someone was there, or they were not. He leaned forward, resting his forearms lightly on his knees. "Because I didn't know where you were," he said. "If I had known, I would have come." Zuri studied him, testing something she had not named. Promise, the word nearly destroyed him. "I promise." She held his gaze a moment longer, then nodded as if filing the promise somewhere sacred. Children often did that, Omar realized. They made contracts with the heart faster and more seriously than adults made contracts with ink. A nurse entered then with evening medication, and the moment softened. Amina helped Zuri sit a little higher. Omar instinctively reached to steady the pillow behind her back, and for a brief second his hand brushed Amina's. Both of them went still. Not because the touch was romantic, because it was ordinary. And ordinary after everything felt almost more dangerous than longing. The nurse left. Zuri took her medicine with a tragic expression and clutched Storm to her chest. "He tastes angry too," she informed them. That almost made Amina laugh through her tears. Omar looked down to hide the involuntary movement at the corner of his mouth. When Zuri drifted into sleep again, the room grew quiet enough for truth to return. Amina rose and moved toward the window, wrapping her arms around herself. Omar waited. She spoke without turning. "You should go home. I'm not leaving. That is not what I meant." He stood. Outside the window, the city's lights glittered in scattered gold and white across the darkening streets below. From up here, everything looked orderly, peaceful. Distance had always been kind to illusion. Amina's voice came low and worn. "You know the truth now. You know what they did. And you know I was wrong to keep her from you." He said nothing. She looked over her shoulder. "I was?" Omar's face hardened slightly. "You were terrified. I still lied." "Yes." The honesty of it passed between them without softness. Amina nodded, as if accepting a sentence she had already been serving for years. "Then you understand why I can't let money become an apology." I wasn't planning to apologize with money. Her eyes searched his face, trying to decide whether to believe that. You already started. New doctors, private suite, legal teams, protection. That is not an apology, Omar said. That is what should have existed from the beginning. Amina looked away. He came closer, but not so close that she would feel cornered. I can pay for treatment, he said. I can tear down everyone who built this lie. I can rebuild the foundation, the hospital, the legal structures around her future. But none of that answers the real question. Does it? Amina's throat moved. No. The real question is whether I know how to be her father after arriving 5 years late. That landed, because for the first time since the DNA result, his voice held no anger. Only the terrible humility of a man staring at a role biology had given him, but time had denied him. Amina turned fully then. You don't, she said. He absorbed the blow without protest. Then she continued softer. Not yet. He let out a slow breath. That at least is honest. Amina looked at him for a long moment. Omar, I don't need a savior. And Zuri doesn't need a man who shows up now because guilt is louder than inconvenience. His eyes darkened not with offense, but because the accusation reached places already bruised. I know. Do you? Because guilt burns hot in the beginning. It keeps people awake for a few nights. It makes them speak beautifully. But children are not raised in grand gestures. They are raised in repetition, in patience, in boredom, in medicine schedules and bad dreams and fever at 3 a.m, and listening to the same question 20 times because a child wants to make sure the answer is still the same. Omar listened without interruption. Can you do that? Amina asked. Can you stay when it is no longer dramatic? When there are no villains in the room to fight? When being a father means being useful in ways no one applauds? He looked toward the bed where Zuri slept, curled around her rabbit. Then back at Amina. Yes, he said. She shook her head slightly. You answer too fast, because I have been too slow in everything that matters. That silenced her. He continued, voice steady now. You're right. I cannot ask for trust tonight. I have not earned it. Not from you, not from her. And I will not try to purchase it with comfort or security or a family name. He paused. But I am not walking away from my daughter because the timing is ugly. Amina's eyes filled again, though this time it was not only grief. It was exhaustion meeting sincerity, and not knowing whether that was relief or danger. I don't know how to do this with you, she admitted. Neither do I. That almost sounded like their old selves, two people once brave enough to face uncertainty together. Almost. A soft stirring came from the bed. They both turned instantly. Zuri's eyes were half open, drowsy with medicine. Are you both still there? Amina rushed to her side. Yes, baby. Omar came too, but slower. Zuri looked from one face to the other and reached her hands out, not dramatically, just sleepily, instinctively, until one small hand found Amina's fingers and the other found Omar's. The three of them remained that way in the dim hospital light, connected by a child too tired to understand that she had just done what adults had failed to do for years. She yawned. Good. I don't like waking up and people are gone. The sentence broke something open in both of them. Neither answered immediately, because this was the new law of their lives now. Not inheritance, not scandal, not revenge, presence. Zuri fell asleep again, holding both their hands. Amina did not pull away. Neither did Omar. And in that quiet room, without speeches, without lawyers, without empire fatherhood, ceased to be an abstract truth, and became something much harder, much humbler, and much more real, Not a title, a practice, one he would now have to earn. 3 months later, the first thing people noticed about Mercy Crown Hospital was the sunlight. Before, the building had always seemed to trap light rather than welcome it. Its glass facade had been expensive, its private wings immaculate, but the place had carried the cold polish of an institution that cared more about appearance than mercy. Now the lobby felt different. The marble remained. The donors' plaques still lined one wall, but the billing desk that had once stood like a gate between poor families and urgent care had been removed entirely. In its place stood a patient advocacy center. A large sign above it read, "No child in emergency will be denied treatment for lack of payment." Below, smaller lettering named the program newly launched by the Diallo Foundation and independent medical partners, the Zuri Children's Care Trust, not because Omar wanted to display his daughter's name like a trophy, but because he wanted every person who entered that hospital to remember that change had a cost, and that cost had once been paid in a little girl's suffering. The relaunch ceremony had ended an hour earlier. Journalists had come, cameras had flashed, government officials had made careful speeches about reform and accountability. Omar had endured it with the composure of a man who understood public visibility, but no longer mistook it for moral action. Criminal proceedings against Kojo Bemba, Selina Okoro and Dr. Kato Mbeki were underway. Nadia Mensah's name had vanished from elite event lists almost overnight, the cruelty of high society revealing itself once again in how quickly it abandoned fallen allies. Mariam Diallo had not attended the relaunch. Her legal challenge to preserve influence over family trusts had failed. Justice Omar had learned did not heal. It merely stopped fresh harm from pretending to be normal. Healing was quieter. Healing was slower. Healing was happening upstairs. On the pediatric rehabilitation floor, Zuri sat cross-legged on a bright rug in the family support room, arranging crayons into strict color order, while Storm the rabbit leaned against her knee like a supervisor. Her cheeks had filled out again. The shadows beneath her eyes had faded. She still tired easily, and the specialist said full recovery would require months more monitoring, but she no longer looked like a child the world had almost lost. She looked like a child reclaiming space. Amina stood by the window reviewing program intake forms for the Trust's first rural outreach phase. She now headed the family support branch of the new charity initiative, an idea Omar had suggested carefully, expecting her to refuse. Instead, after several days of silence, she had accepted on one condition, that the program be governed independently, not as an ornament to his reputation. He had agreed immediately. And for once, agreement had not been strategy. It had been respect. She wore a simple olive dress and no visible jewelry, except the thin silver bracelet Zuri had made for her out of hospital beads 2 weeks earlier. Strength still lived in the set of her shoulders. So did caution. Amina had forgiven neither time nor easily, but she had begun little by little to stop standing as though she expected the world to snatch something away. That change mattered more to Omar than any courtroom victory. He paused in the doorway now, watching them both before entering. Zuri spotted him first. "Papa!" The word still struck him every time, not because it was dramatic anymore, because it was becoming natural. He crossed the room just in time to catch her as she launched herself at him with more confidence than balance. He lifted her carefully, mindful of the doctor's warnings, and she wrapped her arms around his neck as if this had always been allowed. "Did the boring talking finish?" she asked. "Yes." "Did people clap too much?" "Yes." She nodded gravely. "They always do that when they don't know what else to do." Amina looked up from the forms and, despite herself, smiled. That smile was different now, too. Less guarded, less borrowed from politeness. Still cautious sometimes, but no longer afraid of existing where he could see it. Omar set Zuri down gently and placed a paper bag on the table. She squinted at it. "What's that bribery?" he said. Amina arched an eyebrow. "He amended a peace offering. The cafe downstairs made those coconut pastries you like." Zuri gasped, as if civilization had been saved. While she investigated the bag, with full moral commitment, Omar turned to Amina. "The board approved the final independence charter this morning," he said. "The Trust's Emergency Access Fund will stay outside corporate discretionary control." Amina studied him for a second. "You signed without edits?" "Yes." Her gaze softened almost invisibly. "Good." There had been a time when that single word from her would have felt like too little. Now he understood its value. Trust did not return in declarations. It returned in surviving repeated proof. Zuri climbed into a chair and bit into a pastry with reverence. Powdered sugar landed on her nose. She did not notice. "Mama says we might visit the coast when the doctor says yes," she announced. Omar looked at Amina. She shrugged lightly. Fresh air, fewer reporters, a chance for her to remember life isn't only hospitals and meetings. "And for you?" he asked. Amina held his gaze. "For me too." The honesty of that answer settled warmly inside him. They had not spoken much in words, at least about what was growing carefully between them. There had been no dramatic reunion kiss, no sweeping declaration that love had conquered all wounds. Life had become too real for that kind of simplicity. Instead, there had been practical tenderness, shared appointments, long discussions over medications. One evening when Zuri had a fever and Omar sat on the floor of the hospital room until dawn because Amina finally fell asleep from exhaustion, and he refused to wake her for every monitor beep. Another afternoon when Amina found him in the trust office, learning the names of every child currently on the urgent support list, and realized he was doing it because he could not bear the thought of treating any of them like numbers again. Love had not returned as fire. It had returned as steadiness. That Omar now knew was much rarer. A knock came at the open door. Baba Jengo stood there holding a small potted plant and wearing the same patient expression that made him seem older than the building itself. "For the new office," he said, offering the plant to Amina. "Something living should always enter before paperwork." Zuri pointed. "It looks serious." "It is a serious plant." Baba agreed. Amina laughed softly and took it from him. "Thank you." Baba's eyes moved to Omar for a moment, and in them lay a quiet satisfaction that needed no words. Months ago he had warned in his old man's way that what looked like betrayal from the outside could sometimes be protection from within. Omar had not forgotten. He bowed his head slightly in thanks. Baba left. The room settled again. Outside the window, late afternoon light spilled across the hospital gardens, turning the leaves gold at the edges. In that light, the building looked less like a monument to money, and more like what it should have been from the start, a place where human beings were allowed to matter before their wallets did. Zuri finished half her pastry, then climbed down from the chair and dragged Storm after her by one ear. "I want to see the fish tank downstairs." Amina looked at the clock. 10 minutes. 12. 10. Zuri turned to Omar. "Papa." He pretended to consider. 10.5. "That is betrayal," Amina said. Zuri giggled. Then she raced toward the hallway with all the uneven speed of a child still rebuilding strength, but too alive to care about elegance. Storm bounced behind her. Omar and Amina followed more slowly. At the elevator landing, Zuri darted ahead toward the mural wall, entranced by some painted turtle she had apparently not noticed before. For a moment, just a moment, Omar and Amina found themselves standing slightly apart from her in a pocket of quiet. No lawyers, no cameras, no crisis. Only the hum of the elevator and the soft footsteps of nurses passing nearby. Omar looked at Amina. She looked back. There was history in that gaze. Pain, too. Lost years. But there was something else now, something both fragile and unmistakable. Home, perhaps. Not the home they had once imagined in youth. A truer one. "I owe you an apology that is larger than words," he said quietly. Amina's eyes lowered for a second, then rose again. "And I owe you one too." He shook his head. "You owed survival to your child. And truth to you," she said. Neither denied the other. That was part of healing too. Omar took a slow breath. Then, in the middle of the hospital, where their lives had broken open and reformed, he did something he had once considered impossible for a man like himself. He went down on one knee. Amina's breath caught. Not because people were watching, hardly anyone noticed, because she understood at once that this was not performance, not romance for display, not wealth bending in grand style. It was humility, raw and deliberate. Omar looked up at her, and when he spoke, his voice held no CEO polish, no public certainty, only the stripped truth of a man who had finally learned what responsibility meant. "I am sorry," he said, "for the years you carried fear alone, for the ways my name was used as a weapon against you. For every moment our daughter needed a father, and I wasn't there even unknowingly. I cannot ask for those years back. I cannot repair them by force. But I can stand here now and promise that neither of you will ever face this life alone again." Amina's face crumpled. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. For months she had watched him prove himself in actions. Stay, listen, learn, protect without controlling, love without demanding payment. She had waited for the grand gesture and feared it at once. Now that it came, it was smaller and truer than fear had imagined. She crouched in front of him so they were level. "When I left," she whispered, "I thought I was burying the part of my life that could still be loved. I did not know I was also burying the part of yours that could still become better." Omar's eyes burned. Amina touched his face, not tentatively, not as a test, but with the tenderness of someone no longer denying what remained between them. Then she said the words that finally let the future breathe. "We begin again. Not from where we were, from where we are." He nodded once. That was enough. Behind them, Zuri called out impatiently, "If you two are doing emotional things, do it while walking. The fish are not immortal." Amina laughed through her tears. Omar stood, and together they followed the small girl toward the elevator. A father, a mother, a daughter, not untouched by pain, not restored to innocence, but moving forward in the same direction at last. And when the elevator doors opened and warm evening light poured into the corridor behind them, the hospital did not feel like the place where everything had nearly ended. It felt like the place where a family had been born twice. After the worst betrayals in life, people often think justice alone will heal them. But justice only clears the ground. It removes the poison. It exposes the lie. It stops evil from continuing unchecked. What truly heals is much harder. Healing begins when truth is finally spoken, even after years of silence. It grows when people stop hiding behind pride, power, or fear. And it becomes real when love is no longer just a feeling, but a daily choice to stay, protect, listen, and take responsibility. Omar learned that being a father was not proven by blood alone, but by presence. Amina learned that survival and love do not always have to live as enemies forever. And Zuri, the smallest among them, became the bridge that truth, wealth, and power could never build by themselves. Some people destroy families to protect their image. Some people lie because fear leaves them no safe path. But in the end, what lasts is not status, not control, not reputation. What lasts is who still chooses you when the truth costs something. If this story moved you, tell me in the comments. Do you believe trust can be rebuilt after years of pain? And where are you watching from today? Drop your country and local time below. If you enjoy emotional, dramatic stories about family betrayal, justice, and healing, subscribe and stay with me for more.